Testing 1, 2. There we go. All right, so, I love that. That's one of the great honors of being here and doing this event is the collective mind pool, and these two rooms here is truly astounding. And to be able to connect with one another, all working towards one common goal, because it's very easy to get stuck in our silos in the work that we do, and to connect and be able to meet. And it turns out, Dr. Theo and I both live in Sarasota, Florida, and it took a meeting here for us to connect. And now we'll be able to connect when we get back home. So always love the collaboration of the benefit of this great cause that we're all working so hard towards. Our next speaker has a new way of storytelling, as he puts it. He was born with auditory processing disorder. He's the Chief Technology Officer and lead researcher at the Naval Surface Warfare Center in Corona. He's a former senior fellow at the Navy's top think tank, and he's also a professional skydiver, a guy after my own adrenaline heart, and founder of the Burble Creativity, which uses patented immersive storytelling to support creativity and calm in children on the autism spectrum. Please help me welcome to the stage, Taylor Cole.
You guys hear me all right?
Yep.
I gotta be honest, I'm more nervous than I probably ever been to give a talk, and that says a lot. I've done a TED Talk, and I talk a lot at the Navy audiences, but from just the day that I've spent around here today, I've got to know what a lot of people are about when we start thinking differently than the way we were raised and the way the world is working right now. So there's so much that these mindsets and these companies that are sitting next door are trying to do that is going to change this world for the better, because it's going to get us out of that big square box that we all live in. One thing that's really interesting, I have a half hour to tell you my story, and I think in my story, hopefully you guys can see what can happen with somebody that has a major learning disability and where you can go with that life. But also what kind of company I designed and where I think that's going to take humanity in the future. But there's an interesting way to tell the story that I've never done it before, and that's giving you guys the big lens that describes everything and defines everything when you look back. So about 5 years ago, I ended up at a normal psychology department just trying to figure out why I had what I considered ADD. And when I went into that psychologist, the psychologist immediately said, hey, you meet all this criteria that I'm supposedly looking for. So if you could show up to Loma Linda tomorrow, you can meet up with the neuropsychology department head, Dr. Fogel, and if you pass his test, we'll see where it goes. So the next day I ended up in Dr. Fogel's office and took some pre-tests, and it was later that I spent 6 months of twice a week showing up to my PhD student that was assessing me, doing MRIs, doing EEGs, EKGs. I even did a base jump with an EKG helmet on to try to figure out what would happen if I jumped off a cliff and what my brain waves were doing. So at the end of that, I was told, what I thought was just unique news, but it came across as some sort of superpower. I, in some ways, felt like I was Spider-Man, and I just got bit by something really harsh. And in return, I was gifted some different way of seeing society. It took me a while to kind of get used to it, but now I'm at the point where I'm realizing what kind of perspective I can provide to everybody else that may have some sort of disability. So I came out of that realizing that I was at the very highest level of APD. I was not just a little bit APD. I was audio processing disorder to the core. And then trying to figure that out, he had to go back and try to figure out whether I was born with it, and of course I was born with it. So when I was born having to be put on ice, and my ears were heavily infected, and my hypothalamus was a lot smaller, and there goes the APD. So both of my parents were special ed teachers, so I was raised in an environment where, it was, Taylor, come talk to me, and my mom would make me look her directly in the face, and then I'd have the conversation that I needed to have. But I was never that normal kid. Like if you could say there's a box where a kid should go, I've never seen that box. I've never been anywhere near that box. I don't even know what it looks like. I've been that way ever since I was born. So it's just this idea of how can we be different? How can we apply that difference? And what that takes is creativity. It takes the creation of creativity and the desire for us as humanity to be more creative today than we were yesterday. And one of the things that's holding us back on that is how much time we stare at our phones. What's holding us back is how much time we're going to spend in virtual reality and augmented reality in a prescribed storytelling environment, and what that's going to do to us as we start trying to figure out our own creativity. So when I got out of this major Navy think tank, and I'll go back to how I got there, but I ended up in this major Navy think tank about 5 years ago. And the Navy think tank, or 7 years ago, Navy think tank taught me how to think big and how to do things differently. And I came back and I said, I'm going to change storytelling, and I got to figure out some way to do it. I haven't yet figured out that I have audio processing disorder, but I want to do it differently. So I hired all the best lighting and sound guys, a producer, everybody I could to bring the theater into storytelling. So I went to a backspace of an arts district theater when they were on off-season, maxed out all of my credit cards, and built a cube out of metal and basically put in go-go wheels and spotlights and 4.1 sound. And we started telling stories, and what we were using was Bernstein Bears. So, you know, how else do you revolutionize storytelling than go to the most core part of storytelling and say, here's where we're going to start? Papa Bear fell in the water, splash. It was so boring. I had my 5-year-old daughter with me, and I went across the street to go grab a beer because I was just frustrated with all my money being locked into this company and just seeing that I was just regurgitating Bernstein Bears over and over again. And that's when I came back and I realized my 5-year-old, who's very creative, decided that she wanted to tell stories. So she worked with the lighting and sound people and came up with a story that would change this company and launch it in the direction that it's gone ever since. All of a sudden, this lighting and sound made this environment of being in a ringy-tingy building. A building that was just so old. You can hear the fan on the top circulating, and as they were circulating, it would creak. There's dripping water somewhere in the corner. And suddenly there was this big crash through a window that was on one of the walls, and this wad of something landed in the middle of the room. And then little critters ran everywhere. And then suddenly there was some child that ended up there, and there was this scream, and then the bright lights down to dark bright lights, and then this teeniness off into the distance. And my daughter, who wrote the story, had jumped onto my lap. She scared herself. Because she had been this story that was finally in reality, and it was finally in front of her in an immersive form. And it was something that she had never noticed, because her brain had never seen that immersion. So I sit there and told all my team to write down on a piece of paper what was it they imagined, and they all wrote the story, and everybody imagined something different. And it was that day that we invented the technology that is core to this company called Minimally Defined Immersion, or MDI. So what happens if you can somehow trick or convince the brain that it's actually immersed is you can start taking details out of the story. And by taking details out of the story, you allow people with neurodivergent brains to apply their thoughts to the story. So instead of saying there's a red dragon with blue beady eyes coming from across the field, you can say, what is that? Create an environment that is scary and full of tension. And suddenly you can get from A to B in that storyline, but every kid gets to fill in the blanks. So this was something I knew was going to work, but I hadn't yet found my way to my biggest passion over the last 5 years, and that's autism. Because it was this storytelling that made sense to me as someone through the lens of audio processing disorder. I had put myself in a company that made sense to me and something that I really wanted to put all of my passion behind. So when you go back to the lab when we were inventing this stuff, there was one day that the church group outside came to me and said, hey, I was wondering, you got a story company, right? Can you watch over these kids for a little bit while we work on the media project? And I was like, sure. So I ended up with about 8 or 9 kids coming into my lab and sitting in one of these big story cubes. And about an hour later, the parents came out and said, Taylor, we need to talk to you real quick. And all the kids left. And that's when I realized that those kids all had autism. And so for about an hour, we were sitting there telling stories, and that's when Beth Burt, who was on the California Autism Board at the time, it was one of her kids. She came to me and she said, Taylor, I don't know what this is, but there's something happening that somehow worked with these kids. And so it was about 2 weeks later that I got my first presentation to the California Autism Board and basically said, hey, there might be a new way that we can tell stories that can intrigue the brain to actually participate. And this might not just be for kids with autism, but also those with audio processing disorder and also those that call themselves normal. Because those that call themselves normal are the ones that don't have the gift. They're the ones that see the world exactly like the guy that's walking right in front of them. But those of us that have the ability to think differently are the ones that can maybe see the world differently and solve the problems differently, and will eventually help the world in different ways, which is what this whole population is standing here trying to do. So let's go back, and I just want to tell a little bit of my story, and you heard professional skydiver and how all that happened, and then we'll finish back with where the company's going. When I graduated high school, I was valedictorian in high school, but I was also doing community service for 60 hours for being just a pain in the butt. So I tried to go to the Naval Academy, but I dropped out because I just couldn't participate with any of the rule breaking or the rule following that was going on there. I ended up going to UC Riverside, where I was a pro skater my first freshman year and sophomore year. I was 22nd in the world in skating vert ramp rollerblades. So I was at X Games 99. So I was the kind of guy that just had to push the boundaries. I had to go and figure out how not to be normal so bad that I just had to find myself in all these crazy sports. When I graduated high school, I started working for the Navy. Or when I graduated college, I started working for the Navy. And within minutes of working with the Navy, less than 3 years of my now 21-year career, I got caught base jumping off a hotel in Hawaii. And got embarrassment of the Navy, lost my security clearance, lost my GS level, got my team kicked out of Hilton Properties for 5 years. And suddenly the Navy was trying to get rid of me and trying to say, hey, you know, this doesn't fit. And of course it didn't fit. I don't even know where that box is that I was ever supposed to be in. But it was only then that when I was on punishment by the Navy that I got sent to Bahrain to go work on something that I ended up creating an analysis product that made it to Obama's desk at the time. And before you know it, we were changing the way that we do oil sanctions on Iran. It was at that point that I got invited onto that think tank, and that's what led to my company. So I'm now the Chief Technology Officer of a Navy lab, but 7 years ago I put all of my effort, my money, and my energy into this company. Because I think this company has the potential to do something so big, and that is to provide us a platform that will change the way that we apply creativity. So, yeah, let's hear about Burble. Like, what is this company that can actually, you know, help, and how are we going to do this? Well, I started bringing together kids with families with autism, and I started bringing them into my Borns Youth Innovation Center in Riverside, where I had this big 10 by 10, 2,000 LED setups at. And I had, at the very first, I had all the autism advertising going out, and I was convinced that this was just going to blow the doors off this thing, because all I need is I just need kids showing up. And the first day, no one showed up. Second day, no one showed up. Third day, no one showed up, and I'm like, oh boy, this has got to be what starting a business is like, because it was tough. But it was at that point that Richie and his mom showed up, and Richie was nonverbal, Down syndrome, and basically showed up with his mom, and that was my first test case. And Richie's been supporting the company ever since. So Richie started just crawling around in the cube while I was telling the stories, and his mom started crying, and she's been participatory in this company, like I said, ever since. And then she came to me and she said, wow, Taylor, you know, breaking into this community is hard because there's no trust. And the reason there's no trust is because everybody says they got a solution. I don't have any solution. And so all of a sudden it's like, how do we come together and say, you know what, we don't need to trust that this thing's going to fix me, but we got to trust that I'm going to be safe taking this step forward into risk. So once she told me that she was fine with it, she ended up unleashing the gates of Riverside County on my story capability, and we had close to 100 families come out to participate. And when these families showed up, they would have their therapist with them, and the kid would come in wearing their headphones. And we would start with the stories at low frequency to high frequency, low volume to high volume. We would do everything we could to just make sure that the kid was comfortable and that we were going to get through this story action. And time after time we did. And we just kept asking the kids, what were you imagining? And they said their brains were on it. One of the stories that I want to talk about is David, and you can see this on our website. And David was a very special kid that came in there. He was about 13 years old. And David came in, took his headphones off. We started with everything we did, and I started realizing that after every story, he would tell me a better version of the story. So whatever I told in terms of the story, he would go back and say, you know what, actually you should have said this, because there's a whole lot more that you left off of your story. So I ended up going to him and I said, hey David, I got an idea, let's try something. And I've never thought about this, but I've got a story that we've made just to be crazy. You know, it's got gunshots, it's got explosions, it's got screaming, it's got car wrecks. You know, I just wanted to see what would happen if we can create a big enough story to see how this thing can be used. And I said, but here's the difference. I'm going to tell you the story without telling you the story. I'm just going to click through the cues. And so on this particular case, there's about 60 or 70 cues that went over 20 minutes. So as I'm cueing through this, you've got 2,000 LEDs, you've got 4 speakers in the corners, you've got a big 18-inch subwoofer making up the grumbling effect. And I'm just staying quiet, just clicking through. And at the end of that 15 minutes, I looked at David and I was like, hey David, what story did you imagine? Instead of correcting my stories, I want to hear what you came up with. And I've got this on GoPro and we'll eventually put it up on the website. But yeah, David sat there and told this story and didn't miss a single cue. His mom has her testimonial up on our website because, like I was saying before, like just because we think differently doesn't mean that we're different. There's a really fascinating way to think of these difference of thinking as some sort of horsepower if we could figure out the right place to put it. David would go home and spend the next, I think, week, his mom said, writing that story much more complex and much more deeper. And then he ended up giving me this script that matches those sound effects literally perfectly, and it's a full-fledged 20-page story. So, you know, this is what's happening with our kids that think differently. And it makes me think about my own life, because, you know, what would have happened if they would have told me when I was born that I had audio processing disorder? I probably would have ended up in some sort of special ed program where my dad and my mom were teaching. Would I have gotten the same, you know, mechanical engineering degree, master's degree in fluid mechanics? I don't think so. So the question becomes, you know, how do we figure out how to promote that creativity in a way that we can keep these people that think differently constantly in their own heads thinking differently? So what I'm proposing is that we come out with this minimally defined immersive storytelling, and we start with the product that I'm pushing out later this year, which is a tent that goes over the bed that controls LEDs inside the tent plus the sound. And now that kid has a safe space, or I have a safe space to go participate in storytelling in a way that I get to apply my own creativity to that story. So Burble is providing that space and allowing the kid to provide the creativity. I think this has the potential to go somewhere that I can't even imagine right now. Because as we stop, you know, staring at our phones and stop being prescribed as to what we're thinking, we can start going into our own mental state and start figuring out what we want to imagine and come up with our own problems. I believe consciousness belongs in my tent, because it's not going to crush that consciousness, it's going to allow that kid to have it. So, you know, I am so passionate about autism, and I really want to try to create an environment to where we can have that kind of creativity and everybody can feel safe and have that place where they need to go. Yeah. Does anybody have any questions? I didn't think about this, but let's.
Was it worth it to get in trouble with the Navy to do what you did? Was it all
That's such a good question, and thank you for getting me less nervous. Yes, it was completely. It was completely worth it, and you know, I think we should all have a career path that can't be followed, because it just, you know, it's like it's unpredictable and it's hard to figure out, you know, but it gets you out of that normal place. So.
What's normal?
Yeah, and that's what my TED Talk was on. Like, how do we? It's be bigger than boxes. And one of the points was, you know, I'm currently second in the world in skydiving, and if you can look me up and kind of see what it is I compete in, but we jump really small parachutes and we stack 4 of them, and then we rotate top to bottom, kicking into the lines as fast as we can. And so we compete against France and Russia and Belarus and Qatar. And it's fascinating because what it is to me is it's like throwing a dart over and over again and trying to find perfection in the throwing of the dart. Except that, it's taken us 3,500 jumps of getting that perfection, and we're only second in the world. But then if you balance that with, I love to base jump and fly wingsuits, and that's why I ended up getting back to my master's degree in fluid mechanics, because I wanted to design a better wingsuit. And what's crazy about that is the science of semi-rigid wings is only so good. Navier-Stokes still can't be solved. But yet we have humans in this world that will take the best of science and jump it off a cliff and just hope it inflates. So, my whole life, I think, is one of these things that's kind of what I think is a well balance of itself. But I think my mother says that I just need to get married and go calm down, but it's just never going to happen. My favorite thing to do in this entire world is be a dad to my daughter, and she's the mascot at school that rides around on a unicycle. So she's 12. And she's coming through in this light, and she's been the sidekick to this company's development, and really helped us, make it to what it is today. So, any other questions?
Final questions here today?
What is the
All right, here we go.
Your name and where you're from? I'm Patty from Minnesota. I just wanted to know what your website is.
Oh yeah, it's the name of the company is Burble, B-U-R-B-L-E, creativity.com. So. You can come see us over in the area over there. And what we're doing that's so unique is that we're working with the autism community. So right now we're advertising deeply with the autism community. We're meeting with the autism community. We've got leaders throughout the autism community working with us daily. And what's so interesting is the way that we're crowdfunding our company is we're doing it in partnership with that community. So the community can buy parts of the company, not simply give me money, but buy into the company. We're changing the way that we can grow a company in partnership with a community. And this is going to be so special. When we get those 400 tents out later this year, we're going to give those to families of autism, and we're going to get the feedback back, and we're going to build the second version of the tent, and that's what's going to come out next year. So if we work together as a group, we can do this together and get all that feedback and build it. You obviously see the passion that I've got behind this company and the passion that I've got trying to change the way we tell stories. What's challenging for a company like us is we can barely afford to build what we need to in terms of the 7 prototypes that got me to this point. So right now we have 3 different researchers that are waiting for this tent to come out so I can send them the tent, and then we can start getting into the efficacy of the model and the efficacy of the technology. But that's such a hard challenge for people that are inventing companies because I only got so much money to build the product and keep making mistakes. And my first prototype caught on fire. So I had an investor show up in a Ferrari, and the first thing I did was turned it on, and it caught on fire. So the guy left in his Ferrari. But yeah, you can see everything on the website, and I welcome you to send us messages nonstop. Any other questions?
Final questions for Taylor here today? We good? All right, round of applause for Taylor.